Welcome to Wild Instincts. Today, we're uncovering what the bear is really hiding. You know, I think a lot of us grew up conditioned to view bears through this lens of, well, childhood stories and myths. But the reality is far more terrifying, complex, and honestly magnificent. So let's forget the stereotypes for a bit, because we are about to uncover the ultimate mastermind of the wild, the bear. Okay, picture this. You're hiking through a dense sunlit forest. The air is perfectly still. Suddenly, snap, a branch breaks. Then, absolute silence. You don't see a single thing. You don't hear anything else. But right at that moment, an invisible predator has already tracked your scent. It knows exactly where you stand. It knows what you ate for breakfast. And it knows exactly how many people are with you. And the craziest part, it knows all of this from an astonishing distance. 30 kilometers. Yeah, you heard me right. 30. That is the terrifying distance from which a bear can track your scent. Just let that sink in for a second. You could literally be standing all alone on the shore of some vast wilderness lake, feeling completely safe as the wind shifts, and across the water up to 30 kilometers away, a bear has already inhaled your exact presence. Which brings us to this massive contradiction in how we actually perceive these animals. We tend to view them in two wildly different extremes. On one hand, we picture them as these clumsy, lumbering brutes, slow, heavy beasts just stumbling through the woods. And on the exact opposite end of the spectrum, we reduce them to soft, cuddly crib toys that we literally place right next to our sleeping kids. But as we're going to see, both of these extremes completely miss the mark on the biological mastery of the real animal. We actually share this planet with 8 distinct species of this incredible apex predator. You've got the brown, polar, American black, Asian black, spectacled, sun, sloth, and the giant panda. Now, they're spread all across the globe and have radically different lifestyles, but they all share a biological mastery that utterly defies our deepest assumptions. Section 1. Masters of the senses, an evolutionary marvel. So to really understand their biological superpowers, we have to look at an olfactory network that almost feels like science fiction. We all know dogs have incredible noses, right? Well, a bear's olfactory system is an evolutionary marvel that operates a staggering 7 times sharper than a dog's nose. 7 times. They are essentially navigating an entirely invisible world of smells that we just can't even begin to comprehend. And while a brown bear can detect scents from 20 to 30 kilometers away, 32 is the record held by the true master of the wind, the polar bear. They are the undisputed kings of the Arctic, holding an absolutely incredible scent detection record of 32 kilometers across the frozen ice. Because their sense of smell is their primary tool, it dictates their behavior in some pretty surprising ways. When a bear breaks from the shadows and rears up on its hind legs to a terrifying height of 3 meters, human instinct instantly screams, "Oh no, an attack is imminent." But actually, scratch that. This towering 3-meter posture, it's just gathering data. It's not a battle stance at all. The bear is simply using its massive height to catch a faint scent on the wind, or just get a slightly better look at its surroundings. And speaking of getting a better look, their other senses are highly tuned as well. While their eyesight might not be piercingly sharp like an eagle's, they possess something incredibly rare among large predators: color vision. This vibrant perception lets them scan green undergrowth and pinpoint the exact hue of ripe, sweet berries. Combine that with hewing that operates twice as effectively as human ears, and they can isolate the faintest snap of a twig across vast distances of dense forest. Section 2. The biomechanical engine. Explosive power. Now, if a bear does decide to charge, any illusion you had of a clumsy beast evaporates instantly. Let's put this in a perspective. Consider the greatest human sprinter in history, Usain Bolt. He maxed out at 44 kilometers per hour at his absolute peak, while a brown bear reaches a blistering top speed of 50 kilometers per hour. In a race for survival, a creature weighing hundreds of kilos would overtake the fastest human being on Earth effortlessly. And propelling all that speed are its weapons. Unlike the hidden, retractable claws of large cats, a bear's claws grow continuously and they are always exposed. Reaching up to 10 centimeters in length on a brown bear, these are devastating, heavy-duty multi-tools. With every single stride, the earth is literally torn open by these non-retractable claws. They're perfectly engineered for excavating earth, scaling giant trees, snatching slippery fish right out of rushing rapids, and, yeah, for sure, lethal defense. Section 3, the dietary plot twist, fueling the gladiator. So, we had an animal that can outrun an Olympic sprinter, track a scent from 30 kilometers away, and is armed with 10-centimeter claws. What exactly fuels this terrifying biomechanical engine? I mean, what does a creature equipped with massive fangs, incredible speed, and lethal weapons actually eat every day to sustain that massive frame? You probably assume it's a relentless apex predator, just hunting down large game every single day, right? Well, the greatest plot twist of this heavily armed gladiator lies right in its stomach. Because despite all that weaponry, bears are highly versatile omnivores, surviving primarily on a quiet harvest of plant matter. We're talking berries, nuts, roots, and grass. Meat makes up only a tiny 10% fraction of their daily survival strategy. Their lethal tools are mostly used to forage. Who would have thought? And just as their diet completely defies our expectations, so does their appearance. Even that formidable, majestic look we all know is kind of an illusion dictated by the seasons. Once a year, during the spring molt, their thick, regal winter coat falls away. Stripped of all that thick insulation, the spring bear is a completely different animal. It's a scruffy, shaggy, almost awkward creature that is basically unrecognizable from its pristine winter glory. But do not let that awkward spring appearance fool you. Which brings us to our final, lingering question. What really lies beneath the shedding fur of the wild's ultimate mastermind? Because beneath that exterior lies a mind that quietly observes, calculates, and actually remembers faces for years. It's a creature that can solve cognitive puzzles that completely stump chimpanzees and holds biological secrets deep within its DNA that could literally one day cure human diseases. The bear isn't just a beast of the forest. It is a biological genius walking in ancestral footprints. So, what other secrets are they hiding out there in the absolute silence? Keep that in mind next time you step into the woods. But what if their most dangerous ability isn't physical at all? Let's go deeper. So, if it's not strength, what is a bear's most dangerous weapon? Get ready, because we're about to completely dismantle everything you thought you knew about one of nature's absolutely most formidable creatures. I mean, usually when we think of bears, we picture raw brute strength, right? But today, we're going to climb what biologists call the ladder of intelligence to really explore the mind of a true mastermind. And trust me on this, it's going to completely change the way you see them from here on out. So let me ask you directly, what is a bear's most dangerous weapon? Your first thought is probably, those massive claws, the crushing bite, or just that sheer unstoppable muscle mass. We are so heavily conditioned to fear their physical presence that we completely overlook the real threat. Actually, the truth is, their most potent and fascinating weapon isn't physical at all. It's the mind behind those sharp, observant eyes. It's an intellect that is far more powerful, analytical, and honestly, unsettlingly human than their physical strength would ever suggest. And understanding this incredible mind is absolutely crucial to surviving in their world. Section 1, Shattering the Primate Monopoly. Okay, let's dive into this. For decades, the scientific community operated on this massive assumption that primates basically held an absolute monopoly on high-level animal intelligence. But now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer contrast. During a groundbreaking 2012 experiment at the Oakland Zoo, researchers set up these complex cognitive touchscreen puzzles. They fully expected basic instinctual reactions from the bears. Instead, not only did the bears recognize themselves on the screens, which is huge, but they systematically solved problems that completely stumped the chimpanzees. They didn't just guess, they actually analyzed the situation. And this happens because bears don't just react instinctually to their environment, they actively calculate. They possess this incredibly rare cognitive trait known in the scientific community as numerical thinking. Basically, this gives them the literal ability to count, compare quantities, and accurately select the larger group of objects. They are effectively doing math out in the wild. This isn't just some neat parlor trick, it's calculated survival. Section 2. Mastering human engineering. So think about this. If a bear can literally do math on a touchscreen, what happens when they encounter human technology out in the wilderness? Well, when faced with human engineering, bears do not rely on brute force. They exhibit what biologists call instrumental behavior, which, by the way, is a major hallmark of genius-level intellect. In the wild, bears have actually been documented picking up heavy rocks or thick branches and deliberately dropping them onto the mechanisms of metallic human traps. They safely disarm the trap using tools, rather than just blindly smashing it, all just to steal the bait inside. How crazy is that? And the suspense really builds when you realize that they are constantly watching us and learning from our actions. Like in U.S. national parks, bears have been observed sitting quietly at a distance, literally studying humans as they unlock complex, supposedly bear-proof food containers. They just sit and wait. Then, once the humans leave, the bears step right in and flawlessly replicate those exact mechanical movements to break open the locks themselves. So, the next time you're told to use a bear-proof container, remember, you aren't just hiding a scent, you're literally trying to outsmart a safecracker. Section 3. The ultimate biological GPS. Okay, so we've seen how they handle immediate short-term puzzles. But let's shift our focus to the massive scale and scope of a bear's spatial awareness. Their brain operates with a mapping capability that straight up rivals modern navigation technology. 1,000, that is the number of square kilometers a single brown bear can navigate as its territory. Across this massive, rugged, and completely wild expanse, a bear's mind functions as a hyper-detailed, incredibly long-term biological GPS. And this brilliantly illustrates what they're actually doing out there. Across that vast territory, they aren't just making a general rough map. They memorize the exact location of specific berry patches, the best fishing rivers, and even specific rotting logs filled with grubs. But, their memory is also deeply tied to survival. If a bear is threatened by a human in a specific location, it will remember that exact encounter. It will actively hold a grudge against that specific human face and avoid that area for years. Talk about holding a grudge, right? Section 4. The theory of mind. Now, holding a grudge against a specific face is incredible on its own, but let's escalate this to the absolute highest tier of cognition, anticipating what another creature is thinking. Picture this. A bear discovers a food source, but suddenly senses a much larger dominant rival nearby. Instead of fighting or panicking and running away, the bear engages in calculated deception. It will actively feign ignorance, literally pretending not to see the prize. It casually walks right past the food to avoid conflict, waits for the rival to leave the area, and then secretly doubles back to claim the meal. That is strategic, deceptive brilliance at work. Section 5. Emotion and unadulterated joy. But with such supreme intelligence comes something profoundly deep. Let's shift our tone for a second to explore the emotional depth that accompanies this level of brain power. Consider this haunting fact. The vocalizations of a lost or frightened bear cub are incredibly identical to the agonizing cries of a human baby. It is a sound that researchers say literally pierces the soul. It anchors us to a startling reality, showing just how beautifully and maybe somewhat terrifyingly blurred the line truly is between human and beast. And perhaps the absolute ultimate proof of their high-level cognition is their capacity for pure, unadulterated joy. Think about it. Most predators dedicate every single waking moment strictly to survival. But bears play. Even massive, heavily scarred adult males will joyfully splash around in rivers, roll onto their backs in the snow, and playfully tumble with each other for absolutely no practical purpose whatsoever. Why? Because their highly complex minds simply require entertainment. But these brilliant, complex minds are really only half the story of their survival, which leads us to a final, mind-bending question to leave you with today. How does a mastermind survive when winter falls, the world completely freezes over, and the food just vanishes? Well, they retreat into the pitch black to perform a biological miracle, a physiological impossibility of hibernation that modern medicine has literally been desperately trying to steal for decades. What secrets are locked inside that frozen sleep? But intelligence alone isn't enough to survive winter. Something far more extreme happens next. Because when winter comes, the bear doesn't just survive, it rewrites biology itself. I'm absolutely thrilled you're here today, because we're looking at an incredible biological feat that is quite literally hiding in plain sight. I mean, if you think you know what a bear does in the winter, well, prepare to be amazed, because it is so much more than just a long nap. Deep in the winter snow lies a biological masterclass that human medicine has spent decades trying to steal. Seriously. We're about to journey into the dark, freezing forest to uncover physiological secrets that push the absolute limits of biology. The things happening out there in the dead of winter, they're so advanced, human scientists are aggressively trying to copy them. Phase 1, the Great Winter Binge. Okay, let's dive into this, starting with the frantic autumn preparation. You see, before the first snowflake even hits the ground, the bear enters this frantic, absolutely unstoppable physiological state called hyperphagia. Driven by an overwhelming biological clock that's just ringing alarm bells in their system, a brown bear will consume food for up to 20 hours a day. It's a desperate, manic intensity. They're eating almost every single waking second just to prepare their body for the darkness ahead. 45. That's the staggering amount of pure fat, measured in kilograms, that a brown bear can pack onto its frame in just a few short weeks of this binge. To put that into perspective, it's an absolute race against time and the impending freeze. But you know, they aren't just eating, they're actually highly skilled architects. The bear excavates a den, usually a cave, a dugout hole, or maybe a hollow beneath some fallen trees, and they carefully line the floor with moss, leaves, and branches. And this is where we see incredible wild intelligence. Like a master of evasion, a smart bear will patiently wait. It only actually enters its den when the snow begins to fall. Why? Well, because that fresh powder will completely erase its tracks, hiding it perfectly from predators and rival bears. Phase 2, the medical miracle. So we're leaving the frantic, roaring energy of autumn behind us and entering the dead, heavy silence of the winter den. The stillness here is just astonishing. Once inside the dark, the bear initiates a biological sequence that is honestly hard to wrap your head around. Get this. For up to 7 or 8 months, the animal will not eat a single bite of food. It won't drink a single drop of water. It survives entirely by incinerating its own fat reserves, losing up to 33%, a full third of its total body weight by the time spring finally arrives. And to actually pull this off, their internal rhythm just drops off a cliff. 4. That's the number of times a bear's heart beats in a minute. The cardiovascular system practically shuts down, plummeting from a normal rhythm to a terrifying 4 beats per minute. Its breathing, that slows down to a mere 1 or 2 breaths every 60 seconds. Now, we really need to debunk a very common myth right here. We always hear the word hibernation, right? But scientists specifically classify the bear's winter sleep as torpor, not true hibernation. You see, while small hibernating mammals experience this drastic drop in body temperature to near zero, the bear's internal furnace keeps on burning. It only cools by a few degrees, hovering between 31 and 35 degrees Celsius. And this is absolutely crucial, because keeping that temperature high means a sleeping bear can instantly wake up and violently defend its den if threatened. So this isn't some helpless coma, it's a highly strategic dormant state. And this brilliantly illustrates what happens next in the dark, because when we map the bear's biology directly to human frailties, the results are staggering. For over half a year, the sleeping bear does not urinate or defecate. Now, instead of dying from toxic buildup, its body acts as a flawless closed-loop recycling plant, reprocessing all that metabolic waste. Medical researchers are aggressively studying the bear's DNA to crack this, believing it holds the ultimate cure for human kidney failure. Furthermore, think about it. If a human were confined to a bed for months, our muscles would just waste away and our bones would rapidly lose calcium. Yet, the bear emerges with almost zero muscle atrophy and absolutely no loss of bone density. Unlocking this secret could completely revolutionize the way we treat severe osteoporosis and bedridden patients. It's a real game changer. Phase 3, delivery in the dark. Just when you think their biology literally cannot possibly be more advanced, we see the final, most extreme magic trick the mother bear performs in the absolute dead of winter. It all revolves around a concept called a latent pregnancy. After mating, the female's fertilized eggs actually delay implantation. They wait until she safely enters the dead. At this point, her body acts like a supercomputer. If it senses she hasn't stored enough fat during that autumn binge to survive, the pregnancy is naturally aborted. But if she's ready, she'll give birth entirely in a semi-conscious state, literally delivering life while she's fast asleep. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that the physical contrast here is one of the most extreme in the entire mammalian kingdom. You have a brown bear mother weighing up to 300 kilograms, giving birth to a tiny, pink, blind cub weighing just 500 grams. That's roughly the weight of a block of butter. And just to give you some wider context, the giant panda pushes this biological extreme even further, birthing a 100-gram baby that is 900 times lighter than its mother. That's roughly the size of an apple. It's wild. But the miracle of birth is just the beginning of a pretty brutal reality. When spring finally arrives, she emerges as a single mother. The male provides zero help and, tragically, poses a lethal threat, as adult males are known to attack and kill cubs upon encountering them. So she has to fiercely guard her young. Over the next 1 to 2 years, she keeps them constantly by her side, teaching them the complex architecture of the wild, how to forage, how to build their own den. By year 3, these cubs have mastered the art of survival, adapting to conquer some of the most brutal, unforgiving environments on Earth. Which leaves us with this provocative thought. If we can truly unlock the bear's winter secrets, their closed-loop waste recycling, their prevention of muscle atrophy, their incredible energy management, what human limits could we conquer next? We're looking at a wild animal that holds the very blueprints to surviving organ failure in extreme environments. Definitely keep that in mind the next time you picture a sleeping bear. But bears don't just survive extreme conditions. They dominate them. Across the planet, different species have mastered environments that destroy everything else. Today, we're looking at some absolute legends of the animal kingdom. We're talking about creatures that don't just survive, but totally conquer the most extreme environments on our planet, the bear family. It's wild how their adaptability have let them master places that would, quite frankly, destroy almost anything else. So let's start way up at the top of the world with the undisputed king of the north. And I'm going to ask you a question right off the bat. What color is a polar bear? Now, you're probably thinking, well, they're white, obviously. But hold on a second. Prepare to have that assumption totally flipped on its head. Because the reality behind their iconic look is actually a massive optical illusion. A polar bear is not white at all. Its fur is entirely made up of these transparent, hollow tubes that just scatter the ambient light around. And right beneath that incredibly clever trick of nature, pitch black skin. It's completely black, designed specifically to soak up every single ounce of the sun's precious heat. It's absolutely brilliant. Part 1. The Maritime Bear. You see, this predator is so perfectly adapted to the freezing ocean that it's officially classified as a marine mammal. Seriously, its Latin name, Ursus maritimus, literally translates to maritime bear. This isn't just some land animal that occasionally likes taking a dip. The freezing, crushing ocean is its true home turf. Let's move to and see how this builds into the physical makeup of this incredible animal. Section 2. Anatomy of a hunter. Just look at this biological toolkit. The polar bear is basically an Olympic-level aquatic gladiator. They've got these partially webbed front paws that work just like natural oars. Plus, their fur is coated in this incredibly thick layer of grease. It completely repels water, meaning they can pull themselves out of the freezing ocean and be almost entirely dry. No way, right? And underneath the surface, they can dive under the ice and hold their breath for a full 2 minutes. They pull off this crazy feat thanks to massive lungs, a slowed down pulse, and remarkably high concentrations of oxygen-binding proteins packed right into their muscles. But we have to talk about the reality here, because these amazing adaptations are being pushed to their absolute breaking point. Researchers tracked one female polar bear using GPS, and what they found over 9 grueling days is just heart-racing. Due to the catastrophic melting of the Arctic ice, she was forced out into open water on day 1 and swam a staggering 650 kilometers, completely nonstop. By the time that exhausting marathon was over, She had lost 22% of her body weight, and tragically, she lost her cub along the way. This is exactly why understanding these extreme environments matters so much right now. Now, when they are lucky enough to be back on the ice, their hunting game is all about delivery, calculated patience. They'll just sit there perfectly motionless for hours by an ice hole, waiting for a seal to come up for a breath, and then bam, they end it with a single lightning-fast swipe of a massive paw. And to navigate that incredibly slippery battlefield, they've evolved specialized hard bumps right on the paw pads. They literally act like snow tires, gripping the ice to give an absolutely perfect traction. Okay, here's a mind-blowing fact that really shows how extreme their internal biology is. 100. What does that number even mean here? Well, because the polar bear is so hyper-adapted to this brutal environment, its own biology has actually become highly toxic to us humans. Their liver stores such an intensely concentrated amount of vitamin A that eating just 100 grams of it, barely a handful, will cause acute lethal poisoning. They are fundamentally engineered for a completely different world than we are. Yet, as we know, the Arctic is changing fast, and it's causing some entirely new collisions. Which brings us to part 3, colliding ancient bloodlines. Back in 2006, hunters stumbled across what they honestly just thought was a really weird-looking polar bear. But DNA analysis dropped a bombshell. It was a pizzly. Yeah, a pivly. It's an actual hybrid between a grizzly and a polar bear. And this brilliantly illustrates the real biological consequences of a warming environment. The melting ice is actively forcing their previously separate territories to overlap, shoving these two apex predators together to create something entirely new. It's a real game changer. Alright, let's leave the freezing Arctic in the rearview mirror and travel all the way to the steaming, dense canopies of the jungle. Section 4. Bizarre tropical evolutions. 70. God is exactly how many centimeters tall the world's smallest bear stands at the shoulder. Think about that. It's tiny. Deep in the tropical rainforests of Southeast Asia, you'll find the Malayan sun bear. It totally ditches the massive, hulking bulk of a polar bear for an incredibly compact frame. It's absolutely perfect for weaving through that super dense vegetation. And to survive up in that thick canopy, it's evolved a highly specific, honestly kind of bizarre tool, a 25 centimeter long tongue. Imagine that. This incredible appendage is engineered to just plunge deep into narrow tree crevices so it can scoop out honey and juicy insect larvae. Moving over to India, we run into the sloth bear in the number 150 meters. Why that specific distance? Well, the sloth bear has effectively weaponized its own face to hunt termites. Since it doesn't have upper front teeth, it violently shuts its nostrils tight, stretches out its lips, and literally vacuums the insects straight out of the dirt. And it does this with so much immense force that you can hear the sucking sound a full 150 meters away. That's like the length of a football field and half. Okay, let's climb way up now, up to 4,500 meters above sea level, right into the Andes Mountains. This is the realm of South America's only bear species, the spectacled bear. It wears this literal mask of light markings around its eyes, and what's wild is that this pattern is so incredibly unique to each individual bear that it acts exactly like a human fingerprint. Nobody has the exact same one. Let's see how this builds into our final segment today, exploring the dense bamboo forests and shadowy woods. Section 5. Dietary and genetic anomalies. And this brilliantly illustrates one of nature's absolute greatest biological contradictions, the giant panda paradox. Just look at these two facts. On the one hand, the giant panda has the digestive tract of a strict carnivore. It's built for meat. But on the other hand, it consumes a diet that is up to 99% bamboo. It's essentially a pure carnivore trying to survive by eating grass. It doesn't make any sense. And because its carnivore gut is terribly inefficient at processing all that plant matter, the panda is faced with a monumental task every single day. 20 kilograms. That is the massive volume of vegetation the panda is forced to eat daily just to survive. It's an exhausting, around-the-clock, full-time job just to meet the basic caloric needs in the bamboo forest. They're basically eating machines. Finally, let's travel over to the shadowy, ancient forests of Alaska and British Columbia, where a literal living ghost walks among the trees. It's known as the Kermode bear, or as it's famously called, the spirit bear. Now, it's been revered for centuries as a deeply sacred animal by the indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest, but there is a major myth we need to bust right now. The Kermode bear is actually a completely white black bear. I know, a white black bear. It is definitely not an albino. Instead, it just carries this incredibly rare recessive gene. It's a stunning genetic anomaly perfectly at home in those towering misty forests. Which really brings us to a perfect concluding thought for this explainer. The source text notes something profound. These creatures are not just passively surviving in their environments, they are the architects. And it's so true. From the polar bear tracking across the sea ice, to the sun bear shaping the jungle canopy, and the panda chewing its way through those bamboo forests, bears don't just live in the extremes, they build them. They literally shape the world around them. So I'm going to leave you with this to ponder. If these extreme environments continue to shift, change, and overlap, what's going to happen to the delicate ecosystems they leave behind? But their true power isn't just survival, it's what they do to the world around them. Because bears don't just live in ecosystems, they shape them. Yeah, we all grew up seeing brown bears in cartoons, right? Or watching them in nature documentaries, basically learning to fear them as these ultimate terrifying wilderness predators. But today, we're going to look at them through an entirely different lens. We're going to dive right into the data and uncover the hidden truth about what these absolutely magnificent creatures are actually doing out there in the wild. So, it begs the question, is a bear just the hungry mouth? I mean, it's so easy to view the bear merely as a consumer. You know, a giant, solitary apex predator just roaming the wilderness, taking whatever it wants and leaving destruction in its wake. We instantly picture this massive set of jaws and claws. But if we look closer, if we really examine the data and the ecosystems they inhabit, we realize something crazy. We've had their job description completely wrong this whole time. Section 1. Nature's Ultimate Master Gardeners. To really grasp how a bear actively engineers and, well, terraforms its landscape, we actually have to start right at the water's edge. During the chaotic frenzy of the salmon run, something truly extraordinary happens. The strict, hardcore rules of isolation that usually govern a bear's life, they're completely suspended. They form this complex, unspoken social hierarchy without ever actually becoming a pack. The massive, dominant males step up and claim the prime hunting spots directly at the lip of the waterfalls. Meanwhile, the younger bears and the mothers with their cubs patiently wait downstream. It's kind of like organized chaos, a temporary truce, all driven by this massive abundance of energy rushing up the river. Section 2. Feeding the ancient forest. Now, catching the fish, that's really just the beginning. Let's walk through these steps, because the sheer precision of this behavior is absolutely fascinating. First off, the dominant bears catch the salmon, obviously. But step 2 is where it gets interesting. A seasoned, experienced adult bear will almost never eat an entire fish. Instead, they use this lethal precision to consume only the best, most nutrient-dense parts. We're talking the fat-rich skin and the caviar. Then, in step 3, they do something that literally changes the entire landscape. They drag that partially eaten carcass deep into the woods and just leave it to decompose. 300 meters. To put that into perspective, that is 3 full football fields. A single bear will routinely drag a heavy, dripping salmon carcass up to 300 meters away from the riverbank, dragging it deep into the dense woods before they finally stop to eat and abandon the leftovers. Just think about the sheer scale of that physical effort. Now, multiply that by dozens of bears over the course of an entire salmon season. It's wild. So, why does this matter? Well, it triggers a massive biological chain reaction known as a marine subsidy. As those thousands of leftover fish decompose out there on the forest floor, they are pumping massive amounts of pure ocean-borne nitrogen directly into the earth. The bears are essentially acting as this giant biological conveyor belt. They are quite literally fertilizing the deep, ancient forests with the blood and nutrients of the ocean. How cool is that? And the real-world impact here is just staggering. When scientists actually sit down and compare the flora, normal trees simply cannot compete with what they call bear zone trees. Trees growing within the radius of these bear feeding zones, they grow significantly faster and so much stronger. The rings inside the trees literally record the years of heavy salmon runs. The forest canopy up above is directly built by the bears down below. But hey, their gardening doesn't just stop at the riverbed. Far from it. A single bear disperses seeds across 1,000 square kilometers of territory. 1,000! As they're constantly foraging, bears consume just vast quantities of berries and nuts. And as a result, they carry millions of seeds in their digestive tracts across these massive stretches of land. Wherever that bear eventually leaves its waste, boom, a new patch of forest is planted. It makes them one of the absolute most critical seed dispersers on Earth. Section 3. Bear Pharmacy and Survival. Okay, so how exactly does an animal maintain such a relentless biological engine? The answer is geophagy. In the spring, after emerging from the sheer starvation of a long, grueling winter hibernation, bears need to reboot their systems. So they will deliberately consume specific types of dark, wet soil. And no, this isn't an accident. It's not some sign of desperation. This is highly intentional. They're eating dirt to extract vital, missing minerals directly from the earth to replenish their depleted bodies. It's like they possess this intimate, almost pharmaceutical knowledge of the very ground they walk on. Now, I have a bit of trivia for you, and honestly, it's one of my absolute favorite facts in this entire explainer. How exactly does a bear fight off ticks? We all know they get covered in parasites while roaming through the dense brush, right? So how do they handle it? What is their go-to medical treatment for a nasty infestation? Well, the answer is as hilarious as it is bizarre. They sit on angry ants. I am literally not making this up. They seek out the absolute largest anthills in the forest, and they just plop right down on top of them. Now wait, this isn't some clumsy mistake. It is an incredible display of natural medicine. In a ritual known as ant bathing, the bear doesn't actually eat the insects. Instead, thousands of angry ants swarm up into the bear's thick fur. Feeling attacked, the ants release their main defensive weapon, which is formic acid. And guess what? This acid acts as a highly effective, totally natural chemical pesticide that chemically repels ticks and skin parasites. The bear is literally using the forest insect population to run a chemical bath to cure its skin ailments. It is a highly effective, deeply intentional medical treatment. Pure genius, really. Section 4. The Sky Surveillance Network. All right, zooming all the way out from the soil to the forest canopy, we find an incredibly brutal yet totally flawless symbiosis. Bears are deeply plugged into this multi-species intelligence network. They've actually learned to use the sky as a surveillance system. They closely monitor the flight patterns of ravens and magpies because they know that a group of circling birds often signals the exact location of a fresh carcass or a dying animal hidden out in the brush. And in return, what do the birds get out of the deal? Well, the ravens deliberately follow the bears, waiting patiently up in the branches to scavenge the massive scraps left behind after the bear makes a kill or finishes up with a salmon. They are working together in perfect, silent coordination. Section 5. In Footsteps of Ghosts. Now let's slow down for a second, because perhaps the bear's most haunting impact on the physical landscape is one that literally takes centuries to form. You see, a bear doesn't just wander randomly through the woods. It walks with the weight of generations. Bears used the exact same ancestral trails for centuries. And as they walked, they stepped precisely, paw for paw, into the very same footprints left by their grandfathers and their great-grandfathers. Over decades and even centuries, these generational footsteps become permanently scarred into the earth, creating deep physical depressions right there in the moss and the dirt. They are quite literally walking in the footsteps of ghosts. When a bear moves through the ancient forest, it is anchored to a deep, ancient past. They are physically connecting with the ancestors who engineered the very forest they are walking through today. It's just a breathtaking cycle of life, memory, and landscape architecture. So it all comes down to this. If a bear is the forest fertilizer, its planter, its terraformer, and its pest control, what happens to the entire ecosystem when the ecosystem architect vanishes? The future these magnificent creatures face alongside humanity is definitely a battlefield of myths, shrinking habitats, and survival. But now that you know what they actually do, you can see that protecting the bear isn't just about saving an animal, it's about saving the entire foundation of the forest itself. But their connection to the world goes far beyond nature. It reaches into human history itself. Because for thousands of years, the bear hasn't just lived beside us, it has shaped us. Today, we're going to unpack the bizarre, deeply paradoxical relationship between humanity and our absolute oldest shadow, the bear. We're talking about a creature that's been right alongside us since the very beginning, acting as this incredible mirror to our own fears, our myths, and our ambitions. To really understand our world today, we have to look back at an animal that has simultaneously haunted our nightmares and commanded our absolute reverence. As this quote perfectly puts it, for thousands of years, humanity has been locked in a psychological and physical war with the bear. Because, for millennia, this wasn't just some animal we happened to share the woods with. It was a psychological heavyweight. It was a fierce competitor and a mythical adversary that we were locked in a very real, very physical war against. Now imagine a fear so intense, so deeply rooted in ancient human psychology, that our ancestors actually made the animal's real main taboo. They literally believed that simply speaking its name could summon it from the woods. No way were they taking that chance. So ancient Slavs started using euphemisms like medved, which just translates to the one who knows honey. And the obsession definitely didn't stop at fear. Scandinavian warriors actually wanted to harness that terrifying power. They would enter these bloodthirsty battle trances wearing bear pelts, calling themselves berserkers, totally trying to channel the animal's unstoppable rage and fearlessness. And it's fascinating because this beast didn't just haunt our ancestors, it essentially shaped our global DNA. I mean, the legendary King Arthur, his name likely originates from the Celtic word for bear. Everyday names you've definitely heard of, like Bjorn, Bernd, and Ursula, they all translate to the beast. We've plastered it on the heraldic crest of Berlin, and it's proudly stood as the centuries-old national symbol of Russia. It's totally woven into our geography, our names, and the very identity of entire nations. All right, let's move on to Section 1, a bizarre paradox, specifically the 1902 shift. Let's see how this all flipped. So the contrast here is genuinely astonishing. Back in 1902, American President Theodore Roosevelt famously refused to shoot a tied-up bear during a hunt, and that single act of mercy absolutely captured the public's imagination, and it birthed the world's most famous plush toy, the teddy bear. Just think about the psychological gymnastics here. We took the wild's most formidable, terrifying force, the very thing our ancestors were afraid to even name, and we completely, romantically transformed it into a soft, comforting protector that we happily tuck right into our children's cribs. It's wild. Which brings us to Section 2, colliding with the wild, focusing on the modern reality. Because the wild, frankly, does not forgive our romanticism. As our cities just continuously expand outward into the frozen taiga, these dramatic clashes become totally inevitable. We're seeing it constantly now. In places like Kamchatka, Sakhalin, and Siberia, these massive predators are drawn straight into our backyards, lured out of the pristine forests by the irresistible scent of our garbage. We've pushed our borders right into their ancient kingdoms, and they're simply adapting to the new food sources we leave behind. But you know, when this natural cycle breaks down, the results are completely devastating. Nothing strikes more pure terror into the heart of a Siberian winter than a chaton. This is what's known as the walker. It's a bear that either failed to accumulate enough fat for the winter, or maybe it was severely injured, which prevents it from going into hibernation. So instead of peacefully sleeping through the brutal cold, it is forced to wander the frozen forests. It's starving, it's freezing, and it's driven absolutely mad by sheer desperation. That makes it a relentless and highly dangerous threat to literally anything it crosses paths with. Now, if you ever do collide with the wild, survival requires fighting your deepest human instincts. If a bear approaches you, your brain is going to scream at you to turn and run. Actually, scratch that. Running is the absolute worst thing you can do. It triggers their ancient, hardwired predatory pursuit drive. If you run, you become prey. Instead, you have to follow a strict protocol. Speak calmly, Look directly at the beast to show you aren't fleeing prey, and just slowly back away. The truth is, most bears actually fear human scent. If they hear you coming, they're almost always going to choose to quietly slip away long before you ever even see them. But just when you think you have all the rules memorized, we hit Section 3, the polar bear exception, also known as the active stalker. So, while most brown or black bears attack defensively, usually because it's a mother fiercely protecting her cubs, or maybe the animal is frightened and cornered, the polar bear is a chilling outlier. Out of all the bear species on Earth, the polar bear is the only one that actively stalks humans as prey. To a polar bear emerging from the Arctic fog, you aren't a threat to be neutralized. You are definitely not something to be frightened of. To them, you are simply meat. Let's dive into Section 4, the ultimate survivor, showing why they are more than a predator. We tried to dominate them for centuries, right? Yet our historical cruelty contrasts so sharply with what they are actually capable of. Back in the Middle Ages, humans exploited them, dragging these chained animals through cities just for cruel entertainment. But look at the modern alternative. Take Stepan, a Russian bear raised by a human family for 30 years. He displays an astonishing level of social intelligence and gentleness. It really proves that behind all that primal terror, they're incredibly complex creatures and far more than just mindless killers. And honestly, their sheer endurance is just staggering. The bear is one of the very few wild creatures that humanity has never been able to fully domesticate nor entirely destroy. Look at what they've lived through. 11,700 years ago, they outlived the crushing ice ages. 10,000 years ago, they witnessed the mass extinction of the planet's megafauna, and up to the present day, they've survived millennia of our relentless hunting. They are, without a doubt, the ultimate survivors. So how exactly do they do it? Well, the bear is practically an architectural genius in the way it constructs its winter den. Its hibernation is literally a medical miracle of metabolic suppression. It's highly intelligent, possessing a memory that is sharp enough to remember the faces of its enemies. And, perhaps most poetically, as a bear walks through an ancient forest, it steps perfectly into the deep, muddy footprints left by its ancestors thousands of years ago. When you really look at it, it's perhaps the most human of all non-human creatures on our planet. But today, the bear faces its greatest challenge yet. As the Arctic ice melts and its ancient kingdom dramatically shrinks, how will the undisputed king of the wild adapt? What's its next move going to be? Because history tells us one thing for sure. As long as the forest casts shadows, the bear is out there, watching us, learning from us, and surviving. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it gave you a whole new perspective on our oldest, most formidable shadow.